Good afternoon and welcome, everybody. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you somebody that I was following on TikTok for a while, one of my Facebook friends, Tristan. Welcome to our Meet the Atheist, or shall I say the Satanist today segment.
Thanks for having me, Dean. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, no, I've been following you for a while, and I really love the fire with which you you tackle these issues. Yeah, I mean, let's jump straight into it. And could you paint us a little bit of a background picture? Can you share your personal journey and the experiences that led you to identify as a Satanist, and what does that mean to you?
So I'm going to keep it short, but the more lengthy tale.
It's a very long.
Yeah, it's a very long-winded answer, but so I'm going to keep it brief. But for those who want to read more about it, I have a blog or a website, tristankapprights.com, or the friendly Satan, or still friendlysatanist.com. Either link works. You can go check the article out, Christianity because you're so awful you made God kill himself. I'm very clickbaity for a reason, and brings a bit of a twist between my dark sense of humor and my Nietzschean influences. So my personal journey begins where at 18 in matric I was, actually at 16. I was a very devout Christian for most of my teenage years, eventually went over to 18 where I got involved with a lot of pastors. And I've always... Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you right in the sentence, but you're roboting a bit for me. So I don't know if you just want to go back like a paragraph maybe and just run that through, because now you're back. Now I can see you again. Yeah,
Okay, great.
The video froze up and you started roboting. So.
Oh dear, yeah. So it's probably because of the Wi-Fi. Yeah, that's a bit fucky due to the load shedding. But anyway, basically it started out when I was 16 and up until 20 years old, where I had a very devout religious pathway and interested in the macabre and, also interested in what, makes religion and Christianity tick. That kind of, I had an experience in my life where I was very involved in Christianity, like super involved. It's probably an ADD aspect of my personality, where everything I engage myself with, I absolutely engross myself with. So I walked this journey, got a lot of pastors, got a lot of mentors. Basically, I, shifted between churches and pastors like a prostitute during Black Friday shifts between clients. But essentially that led me down to a path where I was fascinated by religion and religiosity, and which eventually led me down to matric. My initial idea was to study law and make a lot of money and, put criminals behind bars, until a bunch of lawyers dissuaded me from that path. And I went to a church camp in 16, decided to study theology at the University of Pretoria, did my bachelor's degree, and at the end of my bachelor's degree, I got into quite the tiff with the Dutch Reformed Church about the homosexuality debacle, because one of my female friends came to me on campus and told me that her mother wanted to oust her from the church and her family, or even her house, due to the fact that she came out as gay. And so this female friend of mine who went to primary school with me encountered me, and so she asked me, so you're a theologian, or at least studying to be one, what do you think about the whole homosexuality debacle? And at that stage, I couldn't give her a clear answer, because before then I was quite entrenched into this bigoted mindset of, gays are going to hell, racism, and that's
can you try to switch your camera off for us so we just get your audio until the connection improves a little bit? 100%, so much better.
Okay. Should I switch off my camera entirely?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you're good. Like it is now, that's perfect. Your audio is coming through crystal clear.
Okay.
Love it.
So, as I said, the girl came to me and she asked me about homosexuality and my opinion thereof. And I basically informed her that as a theologian, I really didn't know what answer to give her. And so essentially, I did my research, and that led me down a path of where I did an honors study per se in my bachelor's, where I wrote an independent research paper on theology and sexuality and marriage constructs in the biblical ethics concerning thereof. And basically that caused a slippery slope where during my research, I basically started to question absolutely everything. I questioned my religious background. I questioned everything I ever thought to be true about the Bible and Christianity, and that led me down a very, interesting path, because simultaneously I also had psychology as an elective and encountered the Freudian conceptualization of totem and taboo, where he basically ascribes religion or religiosity or the belief in a supernatural deity as ascribant of the infantile need for a parental figure, a regulatory body per se. And basically during my bachelor's, I, at the end got into a tiff with the Dutch Reformed Church when I wrote an article to the Kerkbode and basically tried my best to sway the heads of the individuals, but inevitably I got a lot of backlash for it. And that basically was my breaking point, my end of my hope. I was already questioning, already yearning, and then that just dissolved everything for me. And after that, one of my very first relationship with me broke up, and that's something that made me really question a lot of things that I thought to be true, and essentially went in a deep down spiral, read a lot of Nietzsche, and also did a course in philosophy, religion, and science at the University of Edinburgh, an online course, which really opened my mind to different religions. And I was like, well, why didn't anybody teach me about this? And essentially it came down to the fact of where I am, today. I did my master's in systematic and historical theology, focused on ecclesial sexuality as a spirituality, or sexuality as a spirituality without the church. And that got me into the South African Satanic Church, which, long and short, I'm still working on a post about that as well, because that's a cult in and of itself that I got involved with. But instead, it was my yearning for a community, because I thought that atheism per se was too gatekeepy in certain instances. Because if you're not a de facto, a religious, aggressive atheist, where I was essentially, you don't essentially qualify to be an atheist per se. And you don't get to be, get to sit at our table type of mentality.
Yeah, that's the funny thing now that you mention these cliques and groups within communities. I find it so telling that people who have formed this nuclear community of be it whatever kind of marginalized community it is, be it a nuclear community of people who crochet in the 1920s style, like they're very niche, very isolated, very small, but they will gatekeep that community. It's like it's the strangest thing.
Absolutely. And it's quite ironic. After I became a Satanist per se, I couldn't really understand who I fought with the most to justify my existence as a non-theistic Satanist, because the atheists believe I worship the devil, and the Christians believe the same, except the only thing the Christians were afraid of that construct of their own making, whereas the atheists in turn thought I was just a Christian in edgy clothes.
It's true. There's this trope going around on the internet that goes something like Satanists are just atheists who are into cosplay.
They're not wrong at all. They're not wrong at all, because 90% of Satanism as a philosophy in and of itself is aesthetics. Yeah. Shock value, cinematic, and it's actually interesting when you delve deep into the philosophy behind the satanic philosophy of Anton LaVey and what he, what influenced his philosophy. You'll see that a lot of cinematography and architecture and philosophy, especially nihilism from Nietzsche, influenced a lot of his worldviews. And this creative part, this artistic freedom, this psychodrama was something that really, interested me and piqued my curiosity into reading more about this phenomenon perceived to be scary. And I think that concept of scary was to me a vehicle to which I can reach people and have them question certain perspectives, certain ideas, because I've always held the philosophy that, if you want to make someone think, you have to piss them off.
Yeah, it's true.
Can you hear me clearly?
I can. You're coming across great. Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
So how does this inform your worldview, Tristan? I mean, are there any elements to, what does Satanism mean to you? How does it how does it change you? When you like go about your day-to-day business, how does this influence what you do?
So essentially, I tend to think that Satanism, to me, as a more of a I would say a self-centric atheist philosophy, is the fact of where at the very basis, coming back from Christianity, Christianity has taught you your whole life that you are not important. Everybody else, including God, is more important than you are. Whereas Satanism as a philosophy teaches you that self-empowerment, in the sense of that you are important, your feelings are important, your thoughts are important, your mental health, your sexual expression, your romantic idealization of the world, your philosophy of existence, the concept of enjoying every aspect of life, no matter what it gives you. That idea of that tomorrow is not granted, use it as you want, a sort of self-determinism, as well as accompanied by the fact of that everything is basically meaningless in the grand scheme of things, we're just one small planet in an astronomically large universe, with vast solar systems, and what we do on Earth in the grand scheme of things won't leave even the smallest of a dent in the, mechanics of the universe. And so that sort of self-importance per se, without the arrogance, as that would be considered counterproductive pride, that idea of, praising yourself for your talents and using them to your own advantage, as well as respecting the freedoms of others. Recognizing that you as an individual are only responsible for yourself in philosophy, in life, and you are not responsible for the choices of others. But it also grants you the freedom to be who you are and also rebel against that oppressive realities, because I think that once you unlock that part of yourself, that idea of yourself that society has imposed on you, then you create an armada of weaponry per se to rebel against the oppression of society, to rebel against everything that has oppressed you. And of course, when you look at Satanism per se and the construct of rebellion, you go back to John Milton's Paradise Lost. You go back to this created picture, this picture where Satan, according to the Christian philosophy, has been the opposer or the adversary, which in Judeo-Christian mythology he was, but more as a mythological figure where he was a judge, the only dissenting voice who was able to point out that the emperor was naked and that the emperor did not have clothes per se.
That's so well put.
Yeah, exactly. And essentially, by being that dissenter, the only way to basically convince people that the emperor still has his clothes was to vilify the individual that basically did the dissenting. And this concept of good and evil, this dichotomy, has been in play in society since the dawn of storytelling. It's been a way for propaganda to spread itself. It's been a way for individuals to relate to one another and teach someone else to fear the other, which boils down to social psychology. Anyway, it's a very multiplicitous ideology. And so my worldview, in essence, is informed by the fact that once you unlock that part of yourself, explore the hidden aspects of your psyche that has been remained hidden, that is people telling you you should not explore, you should not delve into. The sooner you delve into those parts of yourself that you do not want exposed per se, and be honest with yourself, then you will not recognize the oppression and how damaging and toxic other people's voices around you can be when they are trying to impose things on you, because they tend to think that they know better than you what is good for you, where in essence the answer to what is good for you lies within yourself. And I think the grander scheme, without being unnecessarily esoteric about it or new agey, the answer to life's biggest questions lies within you, in the sense of that your construct of reality is okay, it's valid, as long as you don't hurt anyone, as long as you don't harm people, as long as you don't harm animals, children, whatsoever. In a sense, it's based on scientific rationality, logic, empathy, and reason.
I find it especially empowering, where when you look to religion, it does exactly the opposite. It tries to deprive you of your autonomy. It tells you how to think, how to behave, how to go about your day, who you can marry, how you can have sex, and it's extremely limiting, where still within the confines of the humanistic framework, I can put it, because I have I can't speak for every single Satanist organization out there, but whenever I encounter Satanists online, or read about them in any of the newspapers, it's always almost like the underdog fighting and biting at the heels of some person in power. You look at the TST, for example, in the States, they really rub the Christians up the wrong way, and sometimes they do it in such a humorous, tongue-in-cheek way that
absolutely
that it's done with such delicious irony that
so it's actually, now that you mention it, there's actually a quite brilliant interview on YouTube. I can't remember the name of the YouTube interview, but it's actually from one of the members of the Church of Satan, where the individual speaks about a term called aesthetic terrorism. Where you basically use aesthetics to inconvenience people. It's like that meme you see on social media. If you were to break into someone's house and mildly inconvenience them without stealing anything, what would you do? Something such as putting the keys in the microwave, or putting the socks in someone's shoes while they want to wear it, or tie the shoelaces. Something that really mildly inconvenience them, and that would actually frustrate them. Whereas that would, in that instance, that's mundane. It's something to annoy someone. Whereas I find that the Satanic Temple, for example, embodies this kind of, as I said earlier, forcing people to engage with the darker emotions per se, the pissed off, the angry aspect of themselves. And what are you tarnishing? And I think that to a certain degree, there's also a place for it, and there's also a place where certain people take it too far. I've been through my fair share of experiences, torn Bibles, burnt Bibles, for aesthetic terrorism purposes. And I think to get rid of one's emotions privately, something like that can be relevant. But it's not necessarily, in my personal humble opinion, valuable when you're trying to engage in discourse or trying to convince people of that, okay, I also want a part of the religious or a religious pie, and I want to engage conversations about freedom and human rights.
Yeah. Activism has got a very, very fine line that you need to walk.
Absolutely. And I've crossed that line a lot of times.
Me too. Don't worry. But it's a soft target. The pearl, I call them the pearl clutchers.
Absolutely.
the lady, oh, how dare they say that?
Exactly. I refer to them as the Karens and the frickies, the kind of individuals who, in no small terms have a sort of a conservative predisposition, who still believe that Jesus was white and that Moses spoke in Afrikaans and that the Bible fell from the heavens, written in, the 1983 translation and what have you not. So a lot of this, backwards ideals and what have you not.
Yeah. No, in a certain sense, I get a perverse sense of enjoyment out of targeting these, because it's not that it's easy to make fun of it, but it's the absurdity of these.
Absolutely. No, it's something you mentioned earlier, the Schadenfreude, the aspect of, it's the same as, for example, seeing someone fall down by accident in the shopping mall, for example. That's funny. But I think, when you get to do with, for example, and I think it's relevant, as you said, with the absurdity, where someone would come and say, a brilliant example would be for the Christians who mainly accuse me of only targeting Christians at some stage. A few years back, a bunch of Muslims came into one of my lives and tried to convert me to revert back to Allah. And what I did was, they were so intolerable and weren't open to reason. And the only thing that came to mind to me was licking the Quran on alive. And it's not so much as that I was trying to be deliberately facetious, but it's the idea of that within Satanism, there's this anecdote that says the freedoms of others should be respected, including the freedom to offend. But as soon as you impose on the freedoms of another, you forgo your own. And that's quite something that I've tried to apply. And I think that comes in nicely, or ties in nicely, with the idea of Schadenfreude and mocking these absolute absurdities. Today, I encountered this idea of that Christians tend to peddle this narrative of Yahweh being the tetragrammaton being something that is breathed, where it's actually completely absolute nonsense. Even the most devout religious of scholars, Dr. Dan McClellan, made a video about that, expressing, listen, it's not breathed, that was not a part of the morphology whatsoever. And it's just redundant how many, you can't discern true religious devotion in essence from propaganda and elitism in essence. And so these 90% of these individuals don't read their own biblical texts or religious texts, or don't understand them, and the only way to engage with them is be devoid of reason. Because unfortunately, when all religion or when all reason and ability to try and establish a middle ground, as soon as these two aspects are removed, essentially the only thing you can resort to is ridicule. And a lot of people tend to think, oh no.
Pie throwing.
Yeah, exactly. But you see, and a lot of people tend to think, oh, then you should just leave the conversation. And to a certain degree, I do understand that. I do understand, withdrawing and not throwing your pearls to the swines would be relevant. But I think that when you've got this deep-seated passion in you to, promote scientific rationality and reason, when you hear someone speaking about the COVID-19 vaccine being, mixed in with devil's sperm or Satan's sperm or whatever, not that it's saying verbatim like that.
Space lasers.
Exactly. It's absolutely ridiculous. And there's a certain, balance or relationship that needs to be achieved, where you basically explain to the individual how ridiculous their sentiments are without, using lofty terms or, being perceived as some sesquipedalarian, I think is the term, someone who's long-winded or, uses
absolutely no idea what that means.
Yeah, well, someone who's a I think it's a sesquipedalian. It's someone who basically, such as myself, who uses a lot of lofty terms and, you know, seems as if they are pretentious, where they can actually use a more simpler term. And in my case, it's merely to just articulate myself better.
Yeah. No, that's. I resonate so much with every single thing that you say. It's crazy.
I'm glad. Sometimes I think I'm absolutely bonkers, but I'm glad that somebody understands what I'm trying to say.
No, we are your people. We are your tribe. So, something that I am especially focused on is the imposition of religion. And, you spoke earlier about the principles of Satanism and how, self-identity and, finding your power within yourself is part of that. So I would think that the imposition of religion on somebody else would be something that goes completely against the principles of Satanism, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And the Christians love that shit.
But it's interestingly enough, not just the Christians, because earlier this year, I've also encountered, I think it was during the Pride Month, there was also a bunch of Muslims going haywire about how gay people, shouldn't enjoy the same rights, or how they basically tried to in no small terms vilify gay people for being gay and their identity being celebrated. And it's absolutely mind-blowing how many of these individuals who aren't necessarily Christian still also exist in society. I've also met a lot of atheists who are homophobic and imposing that sort of narrative on people. And I think, there's a very fine line with recognizing freedom and secularism and imposing one's beliefs on others. There's also a lot of satanic organizations that are fascist and trying to promote a sort of neo-Nazi ideology, even, in some pagan circles with the SAPRA or Norse pagan philosophy, you've got...
I've heard of that. I said to myself, wait a minute, aren't pagans like the people, dancing naked in the forest and communing with nature and shit, and now all of a sudden they're Nazis and fascists? What the
No, not all of them, but there are certain factions who contribute this sort of ideology, and it's it's problematic. But it just comes down to the point of that people tend to myopically focus on these popular schisms, and I do absolutely agree that a lot of these individuals, the most vociferous individuals, are from Christianity, and they are currently the loudest voices in South Africa and in most developed countries, especially like the US. And therefore, it's incredibly important to resist the imposition of these toxic ideologies in any way they might, take form, because of the fact that if you do not resist them, then in essence, you create a precedent of what is allowed. And I think that is also something that is absolutely, embodied in what I'm trying to do in a lot of ways, not just through Satanism, but taking hands with the underdog within the a-religious and, smaller, obscure religious perspectives and backgrounds who try to, combat stigmas and oppressive ideologies from individuals such as Christians and Muslims, more specifically Christians, due to the fact that if you look at Parliament, for example, you've got a Muslim political party and you've got a Christian political party. How many times have you seen the ACDP, the African Christian Democratic Party, basically conjure something on their Facebook pages, which is entirely scientifically based and, in the political interests, aside from just peddling some religiocentric propaganda? The same with...
it all comes from some biblical mandate, It's like
correct. And why?
They anti-woman.
Precisely, exactly. And that's one of the main reasons why religious imposition needs to be essentially opposed. And I think we in South Africa are very lucky that we've got an excellent constitution with regard to that, in the sense of that we've got freedom of religion and, freedom of speech and thought and all of that. But the only lines that are currently blurred, I found, in South African politics, where we're not firm on that idea of resisting the imposition, but rather enabling it, is where, for example, certain venues, in the name of their Christianity, can, for example, say that we will not serve gay people, or we will not serve atheist people. And that, according to law, if you only look at it from a black and white perspective, can be perceived as freedom of religion. But at the same time, it's also denying religious freedom in more ways than one.
It's very difficult when you have two parts of the very same legal system that are in opposition to one another, and you have to grant both of them equality and equal recognition. So
exactly.
It's a very, very fine line that they have to walk. And I think in a certain sense, it is a bit of a cop-out for them to say, you are, everybody's free, but some people are more free than others.
Exactly. And it's interesting that you should mention that, because also, speaking of, resisting the imposition of religion, I think what's incredibly interesting is how many churches spring up without any regulation. You can go and open any church in South Africa if it's under some Christian ideology, and you can virtually do anything with your congregants, and there's no organized body. If you're a psychologist, if you're a mental health professional, if you're a doctor, a medical doctor, or a legal professional, these are limited or restricted by governing bodies. But what I found incredibly interesting is that religion is not afforded the same thing, and that's why it's incredibly important to resist the imposition, because this is what's invariably affording people the freedoms to do whatever they please. And it's also something that a friend of mine who passed away recently, Angie Oo, a very controversial, or former controversial rapper, Afrikaans lesbian rapper, said that some people just enjoy too much freedom. And that's, the problem with society.
Yeah, it's very strange. On that topic, the funny thing, I don't remember how it was phrased exactly, but it basically boils down to that your silence will be perceived as acquiescence. So if you do not voice your opposition, or at least indicate that you are opposed to whatever is going down, if people just shrug it off, that's just those bunch of nutbags. Not my
exactly
chicken,
exactly. Yeah. One of my favorite. No, sorry.
As you agreeing and you being in favor for all the nutbaggery and douchebaggery that they
absolutely
have planned. Yeah.
Absolutely. And one of my favorite quotes actually derives from the book written by the great late Christopher Hitchens, Letters to a Young Contrarian. Never be a spectator to unfairness or stupidity. The grave will supply plenty of time for silence.
Yeah, no, I remember that quote. That man was such a great thinker. I can
absolutely.
I find myself sometimes, just putting some, because it's just he had a very specific way with language that really speaks to a person's intellect. The way
he was so articulate and immensely witty and sharp. You could absolutely not floor his debates in any way, shape, or form. But I mean, he was a journalist, so that's one of the main reasons why. I think that's what made his wit so sharp, and his ability to communicate so absolutely impeccable.
Yeah. Do us a favor, Tristan. Just chop your camera off for a few seconds again. Let
cool.
your Wi-Fi catch up again.
Fantastic. Yeah. Sorry, did you lose me again?
No. I got like every, I lost every fifth word, but I got the gist of what you said.
Oh dear.
No, it's all good. We have a question for you here from Nathan. He said, "What's your view on the Democrat Alliance. I think he's probably meaning the DA,
and
then follows up on your
the Democratic Alliance. Well, I'm I would firstly say that my opinion is irrelevant because I'm not a political scientist first and foremost. But what I am invariably very opinionated, but so I find it very difficult to place the Democratic Alliance, or I think in all honesty, the Democratic Alliance and the ANC and the EFF are not brilliant candidates to choose from. It's merely just representations or incarnations of lesser evils. And I think that
the lesser of the evil.
Yeah, exactly. But in essence, they're all equally corrupt. They're all equally bad, and I think we need a new voice added to South African politics. And it's quite difficult. I think, in all honesty, and with all due respect to the individual, I think John Steenhuisen is an oaf, but that's merely my humble sentiments.
And then Bolilang has a question about the Ankh, and if that's related to Satanism. He's obviously referring to your pendant.
Oh no, it's not related to Satanism at all. It's just something I personally like. I've also got a tattoo of it on my hand. A lot of Christians ask me, why do you have a cross tattooed on your hand? Or why are you wearing a cross around your neck? And I have to constantly inform them it's not a cross. It's actually very much older. But it has symbolic meaning as one of the oldest Egyptian symbols in Egyptian mythology, in the Ankh being worn or carried rather by Anubis as the key to the underworld. And basically representing life. And in all Egyptian hieroglyphs, the Ankh represents life. And so in a certain way, perhaps you can infer it to my philosophy, which is basically like life is my religion per se, but it's more implicit than explicit necessarily.
I wanted to touch on this because I see we've been going for a while now and we've only scratched the surface. This is definitely going to have, we're definitely going to need to have a part 2 of
Absolutely.
This conversation. It's fascinating. I love every aspect of it. I want to talk about the tenets of Satanism, right?
Okay.
There's a couple of they've been written out, and I always found them. When you look at the 10 Commandments, it's like don't. But when you look at the, I believe it's 6 or 7 tenets.
The Satanic Temple has 7 tenets, whereas the Church of Satan has the 11 satanic rules of the earth and the 9 satanic statements.
Right. Yeah. No, it's the 7. It's the 7 one.
Okay. Yeah.
That I referred to. Any particular one of those tenets that you would that you find most important or that resonates with you?
So to start off with, a lot of people tend to view these tenets as absolute, like the 10 Commandments. Whereas, if you want to read the satanic tenets, you need to, view it from the perspective of the Pirates of the Caribbean, where Captain Barbossa tells Captain Jack Sparrow, there are more guidelines than, anything else. They're not rules, they're more guidelines than anything else. But so I think, and they play quite an important role due to the fact of, I do feel that even if you are a religious, a certain modicum of dogma is necessary, because I frequently also say that what bummed me to a certain extent about atheism as a philosophy is also the same problem I have with most religion, that is not regulated. I, for example, use the anecdote of the fact that I can stand in an orange Speedo singing Die Stem with an AK-47 and basically call it a religious expression of my atheism, which, seems redundant, but in conceptualization, As a metaphor, it basically states that you can do whatever you want and call it atheism. To use another more realistic example, I've encountered atheists who deny science. And I once asked this question on an atheist group: can you be a racist and an atheist simultaneously? And conceptually, in practicality, yes, you can. But in reality, philosophy-wise, that's the ADD part of me, focusing on that. If as soon as a rule is explained to me, you know, everybody has to follow it, including you. If I have to follow it, you have to follow it, and I will make sure that you follow it as well. And that's something that is carried across throughout all of my religious or spiritual evolution per se. And that is that the satanic tenets basically not creates a moral regulation, but more creates an understanding of how you should conduct yourself as a person.
Philosophy, philosophy.
Yeah, it's a philosophy. The same thing is governed in everyday life. In corporate companies, you get the idea of, you're not supposed to wear a short denim or a T-shirt to your job. If you're the CEO of a big company, you're expected to talk a certain way, to conduct yourself a certain manner. And these, in a sense, are also institutionalized, what's it called? Ethos. I mean, even when I was at school, there's this ethos of what represents the school's body and what the school's identity is about. And so the idea behind it is marketing per se. People hear this concept, Satanism, and they think, oh shit, virgins are being sacrificed and cats are being slaughtered, hide away. They think paranormal activity is going on in your living room. As soon as you utter a Latin phrase somewhere, your furniture starts floating and you get all excited about that. That's just a normal Satanic Friday evening. Whereas, that couldn't be farther from the truth. And I think the tenets, to a certain extent, create a more humanistic nature to Satanism. It basically is if humanism and Satanism and a bit of and a bit of scientific rationalism and nihilism had a baby and created this huge ass conglomerate of things to live by, which is, to a certain degree, it's not something you really have to force yourself to live by. And it's also an argument I frequently use when I engage in debates with religious. It's like, why is it so hard for you to just love your neighbor? If that is something that is expected to you by your religion, why is it so difficult for you to follow it and invariably to practice it? Satanism, oh, absolutely. Satanism is all about anarchy and so on.
Yeah, it's weird. I've always found myself, there's something inherently revolutionary within me. I've recognized it from a very, very young age. Whenever there is an oppressed sigh, I'm there.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
This kind of a philosophy really, really resonates, very strongly with me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it quite resembles what one would consider, the French Revolution. The three basic pillars of the French Revolution in the 14th century was liberté, égalité, and fraternité, liberty, equality, and brotherhood.
Yeah, that's exactly the same. So how do we differentiate between promoting religious freedom and advocating for atheism or Satanism or whatever? Because there is that's the first thing that's being thrown. The first thing that the religious will throw. Atheism is just another religion. It's like, well, I mean, in the case of Satanism, it is a bona fide religion. So they have the right to say. But where do you draw the line between actually just resisting an imposition and being shorn with the same with the same shear at the end of the day?
I think in my particular case, and it's also some of my own philosophies that I've tried to live by as best as I can, and it's the idea that life is the grand discussion table. I've engaged in numerous amounts of conversations about controversial issues, and I think 90% of the world's conflicts can be resolved if you just have decent communication. You have this one person hearing out the other person, and together, you've got a moderator that basically gives the talking stick to these two kids, to avoid them fighting and bickering and, or bickering at least. And I think to avoid atheism and Satanism, and all religious ideologies and philosophies per se, or a-religious philosophies also, to avoid becoming another faction of, we're just trying to converse or convert individuals and canvas members for our organization is, I think it's basically doing away with a cult mentality. And that's something I've walked into on social media. I thought, hey, I'm going to be this controversial dick. Nobody's going to like me, but I'm going to facilitate change. But now people are focusing on me. People are focusing on my face and what I'm trying to, do and say and not say. And I've just completely ignored or didn't notice the fact that they've completely lost the plot. So instead of idealizing someone, idealize the values. I've also wrote a blog article about that, where I used the anecdote of Nietzsche's God is dead philosophy. The idea and not the identity. Focus in the ideas. If someone has a philosophy, do not, focus on that person. The fact that the idea or the anecdote is connected to that person is pure coincidental. But the other aspect of the matter is just focus on that worthwhile thing. And that's something that I think the Buddha said, which I don't know how accurate it is, or whether he actually said it, or whether if it's just pseudo-epigraphal, which means it was written under his name but by somebody else. But nonetheless, the anecdote still remains true in the sense that now Kalamas, if you go by these teachings and you find them valuable and you find them worthy of praise and contributing to society, remain in them. And that's basically what I would say, or what I would feel would be relevant. But there are people that would disagree with me, and that's entirely perfect. I think the more people disagree with each other, but can disagree with each other constructively and engage in constructive discourse, that would be the way of how to not impose, but also simultaneously establish the ideas that we want to establish in society, such as the lack of imposition of religion and secularism.
It's funny that you mentioned this, because I was talking to somebody on Facebook just before we started the stream, and we got into a bit of a disagreement, and he said to me, we basically boiled down to this: I want you to, I would consider it an act of compassion and kindness if you point out my error to me, because in doing that, you are actually freeing me from a delusion.
Absolutely.
I'm under a misapprehension. I'm thinking like the sun is cold, and you actually take it and say, "Hey, bro, the sun is hot."
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's an act of compassion, and people don't necessarily see it that way. I think it's part of our evolution, where we internalize and we personalize our belief system as part of our identity. It's not something that we separate very easily from our identity. So if somebody comes and attacks a belief that you have, or says something negative about it, you intrinsically internalize it. You think the person is attacking you personally, and it's very difficult to actually separate your identity from your beliefs. But once you master that ability to just take a step back from your beliefs as a person, it's a very liberating and a very illuminating and insightful experience to have.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's where you get the true objectivity of
absolutely. But that's, that's what the Buddhists call enlightenment. That's what the Gnostics called gnosis, or gnosis, and all of this kind of awareness, or the New Ages, what New Ages call awareness, or wokeness. It tends to generate a lot of new misnomers every now and again and change labels. But the general thing is to recognize yourself as a person in relation to others. And as you said, the idea of, these individuals just abusing these things would be, I think just it boils down to the fact of, engaging in conversation with other people and basically making sure that, both parties are heard, and being constructively disagreed with is not an indictment to your personhood. It's a critique that comes from the perspective of another person, but that brings you closer to objectivity. I remember my supervisor during my master's degree told me, when I said I want to do this study incredibly objective, and she said, well, objectivity is just a matter of perspective. And that's something that Nietzsche also said, and it's quite ironic coming from someone in a theology department telling you that. So it was quite enlightening in and of itself. So yeah.
So how do we safeguard these freedoms that we hug so closely to our chests? Is it a matter of just being the voice of opposition to ensure, what do they say, you test the limits of your freedom by expressing the limits of your freedom? How do we safeguard this?
So I think that's a very difficult thing to mitigate. But I think that in general, it just, it's restricted to you as an individual and how you conduct yourself. As I said earlier, being a person in relation to other people, because just as much as how you would like to defend your principles, there also needs to be a recognition that other people would like to defend theirs. But as I said, it's incredibly complex, because you're dealing with emotions. You're dealing with people who ascribe their emotions and their emotional identity to a philosophy, which shouldn't be that way. I think as soon as you separate yourself from the beliefs you hold, as soon as you recognize yourself as a person, aside from these belief systems and merely as etiquettes, then essentially you would, be able to safeguard what you believe without imposing that of others. And a lot of people tend to think, oh, why do you tend to label yourself? It's so unnecessarily restrictive. And I think it's only restrictive when you restrict yourself to it. In essence, I also tell people there's nothing stopping you from being a Christian Muslim and incorporating Islam and Christianity together, or, for example, going haywire and, ascribing to any and all religions and shifting them one week after another. This week I'm going to be a Buddhist, the next week I'm going to be a Hindu. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. And I think that
the new cult of the Rolodex.
Yeah, exactly. Be atheist for a week. Be atheist for a week. Be an agnostic. Be an anti-theist, even a post-theist. There are so many labels with which you can experiment until you find something that fits you. And again, it's like shoes. It's like the idea of people wearing branded clothes, where 90% of the time, unfortunately, and this is also something I quite find myself saying quite often, is the fact that the religion in most cases, especially, some very argumentative Christians whom I've had the misfortune of encountering, I told them, unfortunately, your religion is just a sort of a veil for your shitty personality. It's like basically picking up a dog turd. Yeah, it's basically picking up a dog turd, sprinkling it with hundreds and thousands, and telling someone, "Listen, this is a cupcake." Whereas you can smell it's not a cupcake. It looks like a cupcake. It's presented like one, but you can definitely smell it's not a cupcake.
Yeah, no, I get it. So we've been going for a time now, and I want to start drawing this to to some form of end here. And I want to just in closing, I want you to talk about two aspects which I have selected. Sorry, I'm just looking at the other one. Yes, I wanted to talk about the misconceptions, the common misconceptions and stereotypes about Satanism, any of those that you want to address, and then also just talk about some ethical or moral principles that guide your advocacy for religious freedom, and also maybe if you can touch on how that fits into the context of Satanism as well.
Yeah, that's a very loaded question. So let me start with it first. What was the first part again?
Stereotypes.
Oh, stereotypes. Yeah, so I basically explored a bit on that earlier on, not the idea of, reading Latin phrases and having your furniture elevate around the room is not, or levitate around the room is not a Satanic Friday evening, nor is drawing pentagrams and chanting demon names and basically conjuring up all the princes of hell to wreak havoc on your enemies. Rather, Satanism, especially to me, and I actually have a bunch of books that I have prepared today. Literature that I would definitely recommend is The Happy Satanist by Lilith Starr, Finding Self-Empowerment. It's a brilliant, brilliant book, basically highlighting Satanism for dummies and basically exploring it as a self-affirmative religion of hedonism, in the sense of that where you are your own God, you are the creator and destroyer of your own universe and your own realities, and you get to dictate the direction of your own life, and it's not controlled by any other individual body or people unless you basically allow it to, basically. And that's both a dangerous and a good thing, because it relies heavily on your own integrity. So I think that, that's basically the long and short of it. And the idea of further misconceptions is that, no, we don't slaughter your cats. No,
I was going to say you have to hide my pet.
No, I'm actually a massive, massive lover of animals, and I have a cat of my own. I actually have a tattoo on my calf of I actually have a tattoo of my cat that passed away late last year on my calf, because that cat was my entire life. And basically, I'm an animal lover.
It's very interesting to, I think it, we would, I don't know if you went to because I went to an Afrikaans school.
Oh, yes, same.
They called us in, everybody went to the hall, and there was this old toppy there, and he did this presentation on how Satanism is coming for you. They're sacrificing animals, and if you backtrack your record tapes, you hear them praising Satan. It was the craziest time.
So I actually wrote
Satanic Panic,
Yeah, exactly. And I actually wrote 2 research papers on the topic. But touching on the Satanic Panic, there's the paper about, I presented the paper at an academic conference in the Czech Republic last year, which was the Satanic Panic, exploring the influence of film in formulating the narratives of the occult and its lived religion, or something like that. It's published on my ResearchGate for those of you who want to go and read it. And there's also the second paper, which is Satan Speaks, and basically exploring how the post-apartheid scare of the other basically contributed to marginalizing people as satanic due to, them portraying a fear of the occult, or because the, Afrikaner wet dream of elitism, basically dissipated with the end of the apartheid government. And so whiteness was in a moral crisis.
Our police force has got an occult division.
Yes. I'm actually, funnily enough, now that you mentioned that, I'm invited to present a conference paper at the University of the Western Cape next year in January at a conference reimagining Africa in collaboration with a professor from France and a few other scholars from the University of the Western Cape about the occult crimes unit and Kobus Donker Jonker. I've actually spoken to some of the individuals of the occult crimes unit, or way back when I've encountered two of them. I've not had the misfortune of engaging with Kobus Jonker, but as soon as I do, I have a few things to exchange with him, and I think that would be a momentous occasion.
Yeah, amazing. So I could speak to you for days, Tristan, as I found this extremely stimulating.
Yeah, we can definitely have a part 2 about this. I'd love that.
We definitely have to have a part 2, and then, I'm definitely going to formulate some structured questions, because we just went like
yeah, no, but that's how these things usually go. And I think the questions you formulated, which we didn't really touch upon, are brilliant questions, which I definitely think we should definitely delve more on in the second part.
I would love to schedule a part 2 and
absolutely
touch on some of those. I want to thank you very much on behalf of our consulate, of our members, for being so very incredibly generous with your Sunday afternoons. I know you had to take time away from your busy church schedule, and I know the congregation is going to miss you terribly.
Yeah, unfortunately.
You have such a beautiful singing voice when you're belting out those hymns.
Dean, thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate a platform. I really appreciate discussions such as these, where I can discuss my views, and I actually sometimes, remember that I'm not that crazy, and that, some things I actually say make sense.
But this is the thing: is the religion seeks to marginalize and divide people, and it does that very, very effectively. So when you step out of it's a very lonely thing to do, to step out of that circle. And so we have to make our own tribes. We have to make our own tribes. We have to connect with our own people.
Absolutely.
And find and build our own communities. Religion does not have a monopoly on creating spaces for people to get together. Fuck that shit.
Yeah, I agree.
Amazing. Do me a favor and just send me those links to anything that you want me to write, so I can put it in the description and paste it in our Facebook groups. And I'm going to play us out. Thank you so much for your time, Tristan. Have a great
Thank you so much for your time, Dean.